Well, turn 6 was a big one. The Reds built a little bit of momentum in turn 5, and on turn 6 they grabbed that initiative and they ran with it throughout the entire turn. There was a lot going on, really all over the board. Machno got heavily involved in the south. Trotsky was pushing down into the Don, even the Kuban regions, and way out in the southeast, those red armies begin to push up into Siberia. Now the political phase was pretty quiet. Both sides didn't only contributed some small op cards to this. The Whites have secured Poland, Ukraine. There aren't many neutral factions left to grab, so neither side were willing to really contribute some of their big cards. Both sides were dealt pretty low op hands. The Whites obviously had the first card play, and they brought Wrangel and some of his armies down towards Rostov to block Machno. But of course, Machno responded with these fast-moving armies and moved straight into Migalinska, just bypassing that white force, kind of exposing themselves to supply issues, but threatening the whites up in Voronezh and Tsaritsyn, further north of Tsaritsyn actually. This forced a white response, and in the face of these red armies moving down from Moscow, the whites have pulled out of Voronezh. They've moved down south. Over in the east, they've moved their armies back towards Tsaritsyn, which relieves some of that pressure that has been on Stalin for 5 turns in a row. And of course, the Reds continued the chase. They continued driving down. The Whites left kind of behind a rear guard of corps to try and slow down the Reds. It didn't really work so well. And they've driven their forces slowly down through the Don region to the borders of Rostov. Now, at this point, Wrangel played the ill-advised attack on the Reds, which forced Trotsky's pretty weak army to attack these 2 white armies in Rostov. Unfortunately, it was a massive backfire for the Whites. Trotsky rolled really well on his attack and forced Wrangel and his armies to retreat out of Rostov. It was a huge embarrassment. Further north, a red corps caused a hit on some white corps, not much damage being done there. But the Whites have now captured Rostov. Machno's forces moved down towards Sevastopol and are really dominating throughout this region. The Whites are really on the retreat, pulling back into Kuban and some of their armies over in Tsaritsyn. Over in the east region, it's pretty quiet this turn. There were a few small manoeuvres, but nothing big taking place. Down in the southeast, Red gradually moved their armies up to the northeast, and on their final action, because of their ill-advised offensive, they had to discard a card. They were 1 card short. They then used a 1-up card to attack Omsk and seize that. So it's a very big turn. Now, I haven't really been talking too much about victory points or victory cities, but up until this point the victory point count was on 27 in favour of white, and they were dominating the victory city count by about 19 or 20 to about the Reds 10 or 11. Over the course of this turn, Reds have completely flipped it around, and they now dominate about 16 to 14, I think. That's a rough count. They're ahead by 2, and so they've brought that victory point count down to 25, but they're on a roll here. The Whites in Kuban are cornered and desperate. The Whites out in Siberia are pretty much surrounded on all sides, being attacked from the west, northwest, southwest, the south. Omsk has been captured. There aren't many white forces out in this area, so they're in trouble. And of course, Stalin is sitting with 2 armies in Saratov and can head in any direction from here. The one break that the Whites did catch at the end of this term was that the Polish PIT marker, political involvement track, shifted towards limited cooperation, so they can now invade West Ukraine and Belarus, and I don't think the West Ukrainians nor the Belarusians can stand up against these massive Polish forces. So I anticipate those 2 red VCs will fall. Nonetheless, Red has kind of balanced the situation out. It is pretty close. Despite White now having 25 VPs, Red seems to be turning the tide. Stay tuned and we'll see what happens.